get it. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to delving into your life and your work. It's fascinating. And before we get to that point, I want to start off with something that was rather momentous in our lives, which was this pandemic. And 4 years
Yes.
ago, we were trying to figure out how to get through it, the ramifications. How did you get through that time period, and how did it change the way that you do things now?
Wow, that's a great question. First of all, it was a shock that there was a pandemic and that institutions like hospitals and major institutions were closing down and not operating the normal way that we were used to. So number one, it was a shock for me. Secondly, I was not so media savvy as to be on all these, this Zoom and all this kind of stuff that all of a sudden everybody was on. So I had to learn all that like you did, like probably everybody did.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a big hit. And we've just never returned to that kind of a lifestyle. And now I only work half days at the office, and I'm one of the few people that does come to the office every work day. But I work half day at home, and then around lunchtime I back up and come to the office. Whereas before I used to be in the office all the time. So those are just a few of the ways that hit me. How about you? How did it hit you? Oh, I lost your sound now.
I had kids at home, and my son Miles is on the spectrum. So when this happened, his two favorite things were school and baseball. So I was like, I don't know how this is all going to play out, but it was really about being mobile and just kind of you just have to do an immaculate pivot. You got to figure it out. It had a monopoly on us. You got to live anyways. You don't want it to, just you don't want to throw your hands in the air. So it was just really getting in there, and I did a lot more interviews. I have a jazz radio show, so my
Yeah.
kids would listen to me do the interviews, and the musicians were overwhelmingly positive. So like
Oh,
that was kind of the soundtrack going through it, were these musicians that were being positive, kind of figuring out how their lives were going to transpire.
my son married during COVID.
Oh
And
wow.
unfortunately, we could not attend his marriage. It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking. But we
Yeah.
watched on Zoom
Yeah.
with the rest of the family.
Yeah.
But it was like eerie.
It
And,
is.
you know,
It's
just not
bizarre.
the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I know you're an immigration attorney, but if I was to get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis, I'm going to
Yeah.
put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day, and one
Right.
of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you
Oh.
answer them?
I try to help people solve their problems by effectively communicating with them and sorting out the problems in smaller pieces so that they can piece them together in some realistic solution that will help them with their lives. My, forgive me, my mission statement basically is this: it's helping helping clients improve their lives through immigration.
So, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream when you were at that point in your life?
Well, I wanted to be a bus driver for starters, then a
Yeah.
fireman, and then it certainly wasn't to be an attorney. I mean, that was the last thing in the world I was thinking about. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly jets,
Yeah.
but um, life has a funny way of sorting out what you're called on to do in this world. And
Certainly does.
I ended up in my when I went to law school, in my graduating class, we had a picture of all the students. I think there were 300. If you asked me, out of these 300, who 50 years later will still be practicing law, I would have, there was no way I would have chosen me to be that person. But here I am 50 years later.
So let's find out how we got here. Take me back to where you were born and raised. What were the seeds that ultimately sprouted to become this passion for law? How did you evolve to this point?
Well, okay, when I was small, my, okay, my father died when I was 9 years old, and my mother had to raise me. Now, the problem was that she was deaf and an immigrant to Canada from Ukraine. we all come from somewhere. I come from Ukraine. You might come from, Ireland, Israel, wherever, but, that's my heritage. I came from Ukraine. And so I was put in a position as a child of having to try and interpret the world to her understanding for her in the Ukrainian language while dealing with an Anglo society. And, a lot of it was bank forms, documents. You get something in the mail, she doesn't know what the heck is this? How do we do with it? And so I ended up being kind of a helper. And in time, I realized, well, I mean, it's something I do anyway, but I didn't know that it would call me into the immigration world. And I also didn't know, I thought of myself as a bigger person. I thought, oh no, for me, I'm going to change the world. You see, I'm going to go out and fix the problems in the world. I figured what's missing in this world is a great lawyer who can go out, finish law school, study the law, and then go to the world and say, no, with every conflict, what's missing in this conflict is you don't understand the law. If only you understood the law the way it is, we would sort out all these problems.
Yeah.
That was my kind of thought. Uh, but first of all, problems in the international sphere are not just legal problems. They're, people problems, emotional problems, wars, conflict, etc. So while law is helpful, it's not going to solve all these problems. But in time, two things influenced my ultimate career. One was that we traveled a lot. I would half my life I was in Los Angeles with my aunt, my mother's sister, helping her, and the other half of it, or she helping me as a kid, and then later because I went to high school in Los Angeles. And then the other half of the time I was in Canada. So one of the things that sort of came up out of that was I had to pick a part of it. Well, I had to pick an occupation that allowed for mobility. I could not be tied down to a specific spot. So I chose, okay, immigration is such a thing. I didn't have to be in court on Monday at 2 o'clock. There was more forms and applications and things of this nature. So that was part of it. And the other part was I just realized over time that, hey, I'm part of the immigrant experience. And I can understand other people who are going through the immigrant experience because it was a big time experience for us.
Yeah.
And so here I am, immigration attorney.
But I would imagine, immigration's always been an issue that governments have dealt with, and it's been a part of our populations. But it seems like it's more increasingly important now than ever. Is that true?
That's amazing. Yes. And it's amazing to me because when I got into it, like at first I was an expert in everything. Anybody walked in the office, you need a will, I'm an expert. Oh, we got a court case, a criminal case, I can have. So I was doing everything. But I soon realized, oh, wait a minute. This law is too complicated and too broad for me to be an expert in everything. I got to focus. And I started cutting back, cutting back. It took about 10 years for me to realize, hey, even in immigration law, it's too broad for you to know everything. You got to pick some little part of it. And so that's what happened to me. Little did I know, and that's like, say, 20 years ago, little did I know that immigration in time would become one of the most important legal issues on the planet. When I went to law school, the guys in law school, well, guys and women, by that time, women were taking over from the men in law school. There was like still males mainly, but women were coming in.
Yeah.
At that time, the big and most difficult area of law was income tax. Like it was, I was terrorized by income tax. I thought, how the heck could I? It's so complicated.
Yeah.
There's so much to it. How the hell am I going to learn all this?
Yeah.
Little did I know that immigration would become as complicated and as challenging as tax law would be. And
Yeah.
here I am today, like in the middle of this mess.
Yeah, for sure. So who's been a hero for you? Since, your childhood up to now, who's been that for you?
Well, I'll tell you one guy who was. You won't know him. His name was Danilo Shumuk. And I'll tell you how he became a hero in my life. One day I was traveling from it was a legal conference in Washington, D.C. And at that conference, I met a guy named Humphreys. And he was one of the guys that drafted the Declaration of Human Rights. Like it was a great honor. I just met that guy. And he helped us. We're a bunch of young lawyers trying to put forward a resolution at an international legal convention in Washington, D.C. on human rights. And he took pity on us and he collected us at the back of the room. He said, Here, you guys sit down with me. Let's work on this thing. And he put together a resolution that we put forward to the conference and they adopted it. Anyway, I'm on an airplane flying from Washington, D.C. to New York, and I read a Time magazine article. And there's this guy, his name is Danilo Shumuk, and he'd been in prison in the Soviet Union for over 25 years at that time. And I thought to myself, oh, this is just impossible. How can how can this world be like this? To keep a guy in jail for 25 years. And he was a political prisoner. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try and help this guy. I'm going to work on his case. It just happened that a friend of mine from law school was retained by his relatives, Danilo Shumuk's relatives, to help them try and get him out of the Soviet Union, out of the Gulag. And so I contacted him, my friend, this guy, Ray Cantillon, a lawyer, who was in my class with me. And, we got together. He shared all the information. He had all the documents and everything. And Amnesty International was, by that time, Danilo Shumuk had been declared uh, the world's longest imprisoned prisoner of conscience. And for the next 15 years, I worked on his case, not alone. There's a whole campaign of people all over the world, Amnesty International, but in the 15-year period of time, ultimately, Danilo Shumuk was released after serving 40 years in prison as a political prisoner. Now, political prisoner is someone who's imprisoned because he's got views that the regime does not like. It's not, like ideas that are a threat to the regime.
Yeah.
So he came to Canada, and I met him. He came into Calgary, Alberta. I met him at the airport. And I ended up accompanying him to the American Bar Association convention in San Francisco, where he was invited to give a talk about his experience in the Soviet Gulag. So we went down together, and when we entered the room, there were various Soviet dissidents that had been released that were there already, and the hearings were going on. But as we entered the room, I noticed that every one of those dissidents stood up in the middle of a session as if to honor him because they knew who he was. And
Wow.
his whole thing was he was for freedom for himself because he didn't deserve to be in jail, freedom for his people
Yeah.
because they were under a colonial regime, imperial regime, and freedom for all people in the world, all nations in the world
Yeah.
from interference in their sovereign affairs.
Yeah.
So he was someone that really inspired me.
So this has to be you have to put a whole lot into this work. This is not easy work to do. What has been the thing that's gotten you up every day and that's helped you evolve and to be effective at what you do? And also to hold back to evolve as a human being yourself. What's been that collective gas in your tank?
Good questions, Joe. I have to admit,
Thank you.
deep questions. Um, you're asking for me to search in my soul and give you sort of some sort of a defining characteristic of me. But if I had to give you something, it would be something along these lines. Uh, there are two choices in the world. One choice is this is taken from a fellow named Zig Ziglar, who
Yep.
was a very prominent public speaker that I liked. He used to say, you can get anything in life you want so long as you help enough other people get what they want. And I realized over time that that's actually a philosophy of life. The other philosophy is just give me what I want and to hell with everybody else. That's another way of living. There are a lot of people who live that way.
Yeah.
But I've come to the view that working with other people and focusing on their problems usually helps me in my life and makes me a better human being.
Yeah.
And when I don't focus on other people, like if I focus on the money instead of on the problem that other people have, I notice I neither get the money nor do I solve the problem as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the way it is in life, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
That's amazing. That's wonderful. So, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
geez. Um, well, I'll give you four four rules to live by from that came roughly out of a guy named Don Sullivan, who's called the strategic coach and who's helped many entrepreneurs and very prominent individuals in life. Uh, this is kind of a modification of his rules, but basically they are the same. First is do what you promise. Second is come on time. Third is finish what you start. And the fourth is say what you mean, meaning don't be cynical. Now, those are rules that I try to live by, but they are very difficult to always follow.
Yeah.
I do my best,
Yeah.
uh, but that may not be the most profound thing that I've ever heard or you've ever heard, but it is something that's worthy of consideration in a life.
Yeah, it certainly is. So, of everything that you've evolved and accomplished into in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Well, first thing is I'm proud of my two children. My son is an attorney with a large law firm in downtown Manhattan. I mean, I think it's one of the largest in the United States. He's a real estate attorney. Um, Not something I would pick, real estate, but that's what he picked.
Yeah.
And he loves it. So what can I do? And my daughter, Natalie, my son Mark, uh, and my daughter Natalie is a filmmaker. She's doing, she's in the film world. She worked as the producer of the Rising Stars program at the Toronto International Film Festival, and she's making a film right now, a documentary film. So I'm very proud of those two individuals. That we raised them. My wife, who's a spectacular human being, a soulmate of mine. But to sort of wander into the area you want, which may be, sort of more general than just like, uh, I'll tell you one thing that I'm very proud of. I mentioned my mother and that I grew up and she was a single mother and she was deaf. And I mentioned my aunt who lived in Los Angeles, her sister, and that I was shuttled back and forth. And I lived half my life in Los Angeles, half my life in Edmonton. So I grew up like that. They're very close and they, helped each other. And they helped to raise me. Over time, they both got very old in their 90s. My mother was by herself. My aunt lost her husband and she was living in Los Angeles. And I mentioned I needed a career where I could shuttle, where I could travel. And the main reason was I had to look after these two elderly ladies. And for 5 years, my life was in crisis because I was traveling back and forth, trying to, look after these two elderly ladies who were highly independent. And, the last thing they wanted was to be in a nursing home or in some seniors home. And
Yeah.
that's exactly where they had to go eventually. Not because I wanted it, not because they wanted it, but because and it's a brutal reality in our life in North America, maybe not in China, maybe not in Vietnam or somewhere, but here in Africa. But in our life here, a healthy, good way of dealing with Alzheimer's and elderly people who cannot look after themselves, if you cannot help them, is to look after them by putting them in a home where they're looked after when you can't be there. And I had to do it with both of them. And neither of them, they fought tooth and nail. Never, never am I going into any, right? And it's not like I'm going to force you, you're going to go. I had to talk them into, okay, try it for a day, see what it's like, etc. I did. And I looked after them. It took about 5 years, that very difficult period of time. And eventually, I'm sorry, someone
You're fine.
calling me. But, uh, eventually, they died, both at age 95.
Wow.
Yeah. First my aunt, then my mother. Now, uh, that may not be for most people that say, oh, that's not such a great, like you didn't save, I don't know what, South Africa from apartheid.
Yeah. No, that's a
Uh,
great story. That gets to the human essence for sure. Um, so let me ask you this. At the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
well, I'll say this. I pray to God to ask him. I believe I believe in God and
Yeah.
I'm religious. Um, I ask him to make me a better human being, to make me the best father I can be, the best husband I can be, the best attorney I can be, and just generally the best leader I can be. I'm not perfect. I'm not the model for everybody. I'm not a saint, but I'm doing pretty good when I compare myself with my colleagues.
Yeah.
And overall, it's okay. I'm happy with my life and what I've done. It's not what I thought I would do. It's not
Right.
what I wanted big things in my life. Maybe they're
Yeah.
not so big,
Yeah.
but actually they're pretty big. Let me just share one little story with you that
Sure.
might put this into context. I mentioned my mother,
Mhm.
and later in life, not, she was in her 60s. One day, she said to me and my wife, she said, I'm going to Lourdes. Lourdes, France. Yeah. Lourdes, okay. Are you sure you want to? Yes, I'm going to go. She's 60 years old. What are you going to say? And we're living in Vancouver, Canada. She's going to take a flight to Lourdes. She doesn't even hardly speak English, but she's going to go to Lourdes. Now, for those who are religious, they would know Lourdes is a place where miracles happen because it's said that the Blessed Virgin Mary came there, and from time to time, people who are sick go to Lourdes and they're cured.
Yeah.
So I knew the reason she's going is because she can't hear, and she's hoping that she'll have a miracle and she can hear. And part of the problem was this: she saw her life as deficient. Oh, if I could have only heard, I could have been so great. I could have gone, I could have been a leader. I could have, her life was looked at in a negative way. She was Mrs. No. She was often very, we'd see a dog walking down the street. I'd say, oh, look at that beautiful dog. She'd say, yeah, he's beautiful, but he's probably got fleas. She's the kind of person that would find something negative. almost everything. But, okay, she's going. So she went. She came back. And indeed, a miracle happened to her. But it wasn't the miracle she was looking for. The miracle she was looking for was hearing, restored hearing. The miracle she got was she saw what kind of terrible, difficult problems, health issues people faced, people on crutches, people being carried, to the grotto, uh, people who had all kinds of diseases, physical deformities and so on. And she realized, holy smoke, have I got it good? And it transformed her way of thinking. She realized, oh man, this is not so bad after all. It was a miracle, her personal miracle. And
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm curious. That was such a hopeful story. In the work you're doing, immigration is such a hot button issue in politics, especially in America, and I'm sure in North America and all over.
yeah,
Are you hopeful? Are you hopeful that things are going to get better?
absolutely. I think, listen, times are tough. There are over 100 million displaced people in the world with no place to live. That's a big problem, and it could get even worse. But, it's if we're going to try America, listen, I'm a US immigration attorney and a Canadian one. I practiced law in Los Angeles for 10 years, 5 years in New York, and so on. I practice US law every day. So this border problem is like my bread and butter every day. If we think we can solve the problem for 100 million people who have no place to go, uh, that's la la land. It's just no way we can solve that problem. No country, no matter how generous, no matter how wealthy, will be able to solve a problem. So one of the issues we have to come to grapple with is we can't solve everybody's immigration problem. We have to have a border, and we have to have limits on who can come in. And it's either the people coming decide who can come in, or the government of the United States decides who can come in. But it can't, it's one or the other. And it has to be the government of the United States. They have to make the rules by which people can enter. Now, there are international conventions that we've signed that require us to help people who are fleeing from persecution, from their homelands, wherever they're coming from. And we have to abide by the rules that have jointly been developed in order to work on the problem. But not everyone who's coming to the border in the United States is fleeing persecution of the kind that is protected by the international refugee conventions. Indeed, most people may not be. And there are things that we have to consider, alternatives to just what is being used now as a way of regulating who's coming in and who's not. Things like sponsorships. After World War II, there were I think it was something like 7 million displaced persons in Europe who needed new lives and to immigrate elsewhere. And in time, there were policies adopted for these so-called displaced people. I think it was called the Displaced Persons Act in the United States, that enabled those people to come to the United States legally by being sponsored by groups that sponsored them to come. For example, my aunt, the one I've mentioned before, Aunt Helen, she came to the United States because she was sponsored by a US religious group. I think it was a Catholic charity in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
My uncle, Emil, her husband, came to the United States because he was sponsored by the U.S. Army. Because
yeah,
during the war, after the war, he helped in the U.S. Army. He was an engineer, so he was helping with translations and stuff. And so these people were able to find sponsors, and I think that's a way of helping some of these people from abroad finding a place to live in the United States.
yeah.
uh, Broadening that sphere of activity to address the issues. But we also have to have the strength to be able to block people from coming who want to come, just simply because they want to live in the United States
Yeah.
because of wealth and so on. And part of the issue is disparity of income. Why would someone want to live in Honduras if you can make $2 a day there when you could make $20 a day in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Just natural, so we have to help Honduras make life better there so that all these people don't want to come from Honduras to the United States. That's,
Absolutely.
that's a way of addressing it.
Yeah, for sure. This has been wonderful, Andy. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. If anyone wants to reach out, learn more about you, any of the good business, where do they go?
Well, I'm with Pace Law Firm in Toronto.
Okay.
Website is www.pacelawfirm.com. Andy Semotiuk. And in terms of my books, I've written 4 books, published another one, so there's 5 altogether. They're on Amazon. Audiobook is on what's it called? Audible, and also on Amazon, and you can get the audiobook anywhere as well. And so that's the way we go.
Excellent. This has been wonderful, Andy. Thank you so much. Keep doing the wonderful work. This has been great, man.
Thank you, Joe. I'd
Thank you.
love to talk to you. Take
It
care.
was wonderful. Thank you. Take care.